Chapter 12. Money for Jam. With FIIs scaling up their operations in India, the frenzy in the primary market showed no signs of abating. Retail investors regained their love for the stock market, but the quality of companies seeking to raise money was rapidly going from bad to worse. Fly-by-night merchant bankers helped shady promoters raise money for projects that existed only on paper. Eventually, many of the companies and their promoters would simply vanish, never to be heard of again. Self-proclaimed merchant bankers would cold call promoters asking if they wanted to raise money. A typical conversation between the merchant banker and the promoter would go something like this. Merchant banker: Sir, would you like to raise rupees 10 to 15 crore? Promoter: Not at the moment. Merchant banker: But markets won't be as hot for long. You must raise money when it is available. Promoter: What is the rate of interest? Merchant banker: There is none. Promoter: Really? But I still have to return the money at some point, right? Merchant banker: No, and that is the beauty of it. Promoter suspiciously: You mean I get the money, I don't have to pay interest, and I don't have to return it? Is that what you are saying? Merchant banker: Exactly. Promoter: You have got me interested. In less than a week, a flaky prospectus with ambitious projects and projections would be ready and the company would be all set to go public. The merchant banker would get to keep anywhere between 10 to 15%, even 20% of the capital raised. GB once told me about a promoter of an electronic goods trading firm who happened to be a good friend of his. Seeing everybody around him make a beeline for a capital market, this friend of mine too decided to try his luck. Sure enough, he managed to get a merchant banker who assured him that his company would find plenty of takers. When I met him at a party, he told me he was planning to price his issue at rupees 50. I told him he would be out of his mind to do so. On what basis can you price it at rupees 50, and who would want to pay that much when you do not have the earnings to support such a valuation? It is much safer to price your issue at 1/3 of that, I told him. He promised to think over it. I happened to bump into him a week later. He came up to me and said, Govind bhai, I thought about what you told me at the party the other day, and I kept asking myself about the logic of pricing my issue at rupees 50. 2 days back, I was having a shower. A thought struck me. Why can't my issue price be rupees 75? Why should it be just rupees 50? So I have decided to price my issue at rupees 75. GB's friend was successful in raising rupees 10 crore. That may sound like chicken feed today, but it was a significant sum at that time. More so for GB's friend who made less than 1/10 of the sum annually as net profit. It was certainly good enough for some people who would never need to work again for the rest of their lives if they invested it wisely. I asked GB what happened to his friend. I guess he would never have dreamed of coming across such a huge sum in so short a time. He did not know what to do with it, or maybe he figured it out. One fine day he simply vanished, GB said. Aware of the crazy things happening in the market, SEBI stepped in to keep the merchant bankers as well as promoters on a leash. Regulations were laid down for merchant bankers, and those seeking business from companies had to have a license from SEBI. Merchant bankers were classified as grade 1, 2, 3 or 4 depending on their resources and pedigree. There were other regulations to make the market a safer place for retail investors, such as the requirement of companies to disclose all material facts, follow a code of advertisement, vetting of offer documents by SEBI, and furnishing of annual statements. The minimum percentage of the issue to be reserved for the public was reduced to 25% from 60%. When the rule was first introduced in 1993, FIIs and mutual funds had not yet begun to invest in a big way. But as their domination increased over the years, retail investors would gradually be marginalized in the public issue market. On paper at least, SEBI had put in sufficient checks and balances to avoid a Wild West setting in the primary market. In reality, it was not too difficult for unscrupulous promoters and their merchant bankers to get around the rules, as the MS Shoes fiasco in early 1995 would show. Usually, when a company received an acknowledgement card from SEBI clearing its prospectus, the promoter would take a bridge loan, a short-term loan from banks against the expected IPO proceeds. The money borrowed from the bank would be used to ramp up the price in the grey market to ensure the stock quoted at a big premium on the listing day. If the company was already listed and doing a follow-on public offering, the bank loan would be used to boost the stock price in the secondary market. It was not just the promoters and merchant bankers who were greedy. An ex-sheriff of Mumbai and a respected name in social circles was known to charge rupees 5 lakh in shares and rupees 5 lakh in cash to allow his name to be listed as a director on the board of some of the IPO-bound companies. This gentleman would stay on the board for a few months post-listing and then head for the next company that was looking for credible names. In 1994 to 1995, over 1300 companies raised rupees 21,000 crore through public issues. That figure would not be surpassed for some years to come. Some quality companies were part of the procession too, though investors would realize their true worth only many years later. The boom in the primary market fired up the secondary market, and for players like me, there was money to be made in the secondary market and in the booming grey market for public issues. By mid-September 1994, the Sensex had climbed to a high of 4,643. From then onward, it would be downhill for a long time to come, even though most brokers had taken it for granted that a 5,000 for Sensex was less than a couple of months away. That year I got married to Beena, a match arranged by my parents. I was reluctant to take time off for my honeymoon because of the action in the stock market, but it was GB who prevailed on me to take a break. The market isn't going anywhere, Lala. Also, don't make it obvious to Beena that the stock market will always be your first love, he said in one of his rare jovial moods. After a 2-week holiday, during which we toured Delhi and Himachal Pradesh, I was back at work. Screen-based trading had begun to pick up despite the misgivings of the older generations of brokers. Initially, like most other traders, I was not happy at having to punch in trades on the screen. It made me feel more like a computer operator than a stock market player. Slowly, I overcome my reservations and warmed to the concept. Watching the screen and the constant flickering of prices was an education in itself. I would look for patterns and try to guess which way prices were headed. Over the years, I could with a reasonable degree of accuracy figure out which operator was manipulating the prices too. In the initial days, it had been hard to make out what was happening, as circular trading via cartels often presented a misleading picture of what was going on. The trading bug slowly spread to retail investors too, now that they could get quotes in real time. Earlier they were getting the quotes only at the end of the day. Easy access to prices led to many retail investors buying and selling more often than they otherwise had during the days of trading ring. Being with GB too made for education of a different kind. I admired his ability to keep cool in the most trying situations and liked the earthy wisdoms he dispensed to people seeking his advice. The promoter of a mid-sized pharma company, which would later grow to become one of the largest firms in the sector, once approached him with a problem. Operator X is short selling my shares almost on a daily basis, he told GB. Is there something about the company that he knows but the market doesn't? GB asked him. There is nothing wrong with the business or the books if that is what you want, the promoter said. If you want me to help you, be upfront. Only then can I give you the right solution. Have you pledged a big chunk of your shares with somebody? GB asked the promoter. Trust me, there is nothing wrong. I want you to help me boost the price so that I can teach him a lesson, the promoter said. If there is nothing wrong with the company, my advice to you is to not do anything. Be patient, GB advised. But my stock price will end up getting hammered for no reason. I can't let that happen. I have the money to support the price, so why shouldn't I? He argued. You shouldn't, because that is exactly what he wants you to do. Once you start to support the price by buying through friendly brokers, he will see that you are panicking and start hammering the price even more. At some point when you stop supporting the stock, it will be seen as a sign of weakness on your part, and the other bears too will be emboldened to take you on. Let the fundamentals prevail. He will not be able to beat down your stock below a certain level because other informed buyers will find it attractive and start buying. The operator will then be forced to cover his positions, GB said. The promoter was not very convinced with this argument, but out of respect for GB, he did as he was told. The stock price weakened for a week, but things turned out exactly the way GB had predicted. In less than a month, the price stabilized and then started itching up as the operator decided to cover up his short positions. Among GB's clients, I found Radhakrishan Damani to be the most disciplined when it came to trading. and most patient when it came to investing. Radhakishan had made a killing in the market crash of 1992 following the securities scam, but had managed to keep a low profile. I got to know from the market that he had some perilously close to bankruptcy and had pledged a sizable chunk of his blue chip holdings to be able to stay in the game for a few more days. His gamble paid off, and never in his career after that was he revisited by a similar situation. Radhakishan, at 32, was a relatively late entrant to the stock market. Though his father and brother had already been in the stockbroking business for a while when he joined them. He began his working life dealing in ball bearings before he decided to try his hand at share trading. The family's broking card was in the name of his brother Gopi Kishan S. Damani, and the firm was known in the market circle simply as GS. Many years later, even after he had made a name for himself, Radhakishan Damani would still be known in the market circles as GS. The soft-spoken and extremely reclusive Radhakishan found an unlikely partner in the outspoken and highly sprung Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, a few years his junior. The duo were like chalk and cheese in many respects but shared a common ideology of value investing, even if they did not always bet on the same stocks. In fact, there were occasions when they took opposite calls on the same stock without their strategies affecting their camaraderie. Almost everybody on Dalal Street started his career as a speculator, and a smart few managed to grow their initial profits into a fortune by evolving into long-term investors. By mid-1990s, the Radhakishan Damani and Rakesh Jhunjhunwala duo, GS Rakesh as the market knew the pair, were in the process of their transition after having made a fortune as traders. Radhakishan had built a sizable portfolio dominated by MNC blue chips, with Indian Shaving Products Limited, ISPL, later renamed as Gillette India, being one of his big bets. Rakesh was not as big a fan of MNCs as his trading partner, and while his portfolio did have MNC names, it was dominated by domestic companies. I tried to study the strategies of the masters of the game like GS and Rakesh and improvised on them with some techniques of my own. Meanwhile, the party in the primary market carried on. Junk companies and their dubious promoters were having a free run, with the underlying strength in the economy giving investors the confidence that the best was yet to come. Then in February 1995, investors got their first reality check as to the quality of companies and promoters that were raising money from the market. The botched MS Shoes public issue revealed how easy it was for promoters and merchant bankers to hoodwink the regulator. Worst still, the episode also exposed the lax oversight by SEBI in this particular case and the corruption within its ranks. The Pawan Sachdev promoter company wanted to raise rupees 700 crore to fund a hotel project and a yarn project. It decided to make a composite public issue cum rights share offering. The public issue was for fully convertible debentures, bonds that could be converted to equity later on. MS Shoes was already listed, and the promoter, in collusion with associate bankers, wrapped up the stock price to charge a hefty premium for the issue. Shares of MS Shoes climbed from rupees 268 in July 1994 to a record high of rupees 505 by January 1995. Thanks to rampant manipulation by brokers backed by Sachdeva, when the stock price of MS Shoes collapsed, the brokers who were buying on behalf of the company could not meet their pay-in obligation to the stock exchange. The BSE had to be closed for 3 days as the exchange officials sorted out the mess caused by defaulting brokers. Sachdeva was raided by the taxman and soon after arrested by the CBI. FIRs were filed against 2 officials of SBI Caps, the merchant banker to the issue, and 3 senior SEBI officials. The government was keen to send out the message that promoters could not take the investing community for granted. There was some good news for BSE brokers in July that year when SEBI revived Badla trading, although the system was revised and was applicable only to A group stocks on the BSE. The banning of Badla had impacted trading volumes on the BSE, through the frenzy in the primary market had compensated for it to a large extent. In 1995 to 1996, industrial output grew a record 11.7% and GDP by 7.1%. The seeds of reform sown in 1991 were beginning to reap a rich harvest, and as it always happens during good times, investors expected the run to continue forever. But the primary market was slowly beginning to lose steam even as the economy appeared to be in good health.